Thank you for joining us today. Welcome to Education.Elevated, a podcast from Avenues, the World School. I'll be your host today. I'm Tim McNamara, the head of the secondary division at Avenues São Paulo. Our guest today is Claudia Costin. Claudia has held a rich variety of roles in education, including having been the Secretary of Education in Rio de Janeiro, a Senior Director of Education for the World Bank Group, and the founder of the Center for Excellence in Innovation and Education Policies, which was part of the FGV Foundation. As a Brazilian, she brings both a local and a global perspective to education, and she's a great guest for our discussion today because she's been thinking and writing about the influence of technology, specifically artificial intelligence, on education long before the most recent explosion of interest in AI. Our intention today is to learn more about her perspective on how schools can and should evolve in an age of job extinction. Claudia, thanks so much for joining us today.
I'm very happy to have been invited for this podcast, and good to talk to you, Tim, and to those who will listen to us.
Great. So Claudia, you wrote back in 2021 that we will need to emphasize, quote, we will need to emphasize in schools the development of abilities that differentiate us from machines, end quote. And I wanted to use that as the jumping off point for our discussion today. But I think it might be interesting to start with your personal background to understand how that influenced your perspective on schools and their purpose. So you were the daughter of two refugees who met here in Brazil. And could you tell us about how that shaped your family background, shaped your perspective on education?
Well, this was very important for me because first I felt a little bit odd in school. I was in a girls' school, and my mother was Hungarian, my father Romanian. My mother has studied only up to what we call today 7th grade. She was unable to finish lower secondary. Because there was an exam to be taken in Brazil, she didn't speak Portuguese, so she was unable to do it. But at the same time, she was a person that was passionate about mathematics. If you can believe somebody can be truly passionate about mathematics, that was my mother. And she self-taught. She taught herself mathematics. She often said that, the only thing that nobody can steal from you is what you have in your head. And that was very important in my formative years. My father was a Romanian who, when he arrived in Brazil, he didn't speak Portuguese. So my first language was not Portuguese nor English, it was French. So they communicated between the two of them in French, so it became the family language. I learned Portuguese in kindergarten. But since I learned that, I started to play in Portuguese and to respond to my parents in Portuguese. But that was very important in my formation. At the same time, it was strange. In school, I was very different from the other girls. And sometimes I felt that I didn't belong. I didn't truly belong there because I was seen as strange. Later, I discovered that part of it was also because my parents were Jewish. I was in a Catholic school, and I didn't know that I was Jewish. I only understood that there were some strange things going on. Later in life, I understood what it was.
So being someone who didn't know the language, who felt apart, How did it come to be that you eventually wanted to be a teacher? It seemed like school was a place where you didn't feel you belonged, but now you've spent your life working with schools in that sector.
Because I thought that it was so unfair what happened to my mother, that she was unable to go to university or even to go to high school. And her phrase, remember that the only thing nobody can steal from you, because they stole everything from her family when she was in Hungary. She left Hungary in 1944. So for those of you who are listening me and know history, know exactly what it represents. So she is a Holocaust survivor. It was very painful. And I said, I want to devote myself to being a teacher, ensuring that every kid can learn. And I started working very early on at the beginning of university in teaching adults, what we call in Portuguese, EJA, which translates into education of youth and adults that didn't have access to education, using Paulo Freire's methods, which some people already knew at that time. Now he's the patron of education in Brazil, but he was not so well known at that time.
So that formative experience of knowing your mother had a passion for mathematics, wasn't able to pursue it formally in education, in part motivated you to get involved in education. Could you say more about that initial work, that formative work that you did with adults and students using Freire's methodology or approach?
I saw something that my mother, this is also an influence from my mother. My mother later became a system analyst from IBM, believe it or not, without having a high school diploma. But going back to my formative years and my beginning as a teacher, in my university, we had a program to teach people who lived nearby and were not literate. And I have seen my mother teaching a maid that we have in the house how to read and write in Portuguese with her little accent, but she did it. And I told my mother, I can do it. I can help her. So when I was succeeding my mother as the teacher of this maid, and I have studied to become a teacher in high school. At that time, we studied that in high school. So I read about Paulo Freire. And when I started studying in Fundação Getúlio Vargas, I decided that I would use Paulo Freire approach to teaching literacy. And it was a good experience, and it was important for me. But there is something else that I need to tell you. I went to Fundação Getúlio Vargas to study public administration, which translates into public policy in English, because my father was a businessman. He had a small company, and he was preparing my older brother to become his successor. My older brother, unfortunately, died in an accident, in a car accident. So 3 days after the death of my brother, my father came to me and said, I know that you want to study psychology or pedagogy to become a teacher, but I want to beg you to study business. And that was a nightmare because I didn't want to.
To take over the business?
No, I didn't want. At that time, I wanted to save the world, things like that. And I thought, well, businessmen are quote unquote bourgeois. I don't want to become one of them. But I didn't want to hurt my father as well, because he had just lost my older brother. And so I asked for some days to think. Some days later, I came back to him because I had discovered that Fundação Getúlio Vargas had a course on public policy. And that's how I went there, because that was not a route to become a bourgeois. It was a route to perhaps work in education in another fashion. And that's how I ended up there, and I realized that it was feasible.
So some substantial formative experiences to land you on this path to education. Sadly, death of your brother, and also the family background as well that led you there. And I think what you mentioned about teaching literacy through Freire-style methodology, I think is a good opportunity to dig a little more into equity, and something that you've been devoted to for a long time. And I think, one way that maybe Freire would think about it is if you want to have a discussion with a group, you can put a plow in front of the group and then ask the owner of the plow, the person who works it, the person who owns the land, to have a discussion. And it creates maybe a little bit of equity in that discussion, because they can all participate. They all have perspectives that are valuable to share.
Definitely.
That's maybe something happens within a smaller setting. But you've thought about equity from anywhere from the classroom to schools and districts and the globe. So I'd love to just hear you talk a little bit about how do you think about equity in terms of education?
Well, equity challenges us to think not in a linear fashion, like equality. It's not equality. It challenges us to think on giving more to the ones that have less, giving additional support, increased resources and opportunities. Brazil is a very unequal country. And it's hard to notice in some cities, not in Rio because it's very mixed up, but because there is a kind of geographic apartheid. You don't see every day the poorer people. And this inequality translates into inequalities in education as well. So nowadays that I lived a lot, and I realized that the ways I wanted to save the world were not the best ways. I truly believe, without being naive, that if you give better quality education for the ones that need the more, because they don't have families that will expose them to cultural opportunities, that won't take them to visit museums or go to the theater or read books or have books at home, you can build a more cohesive society. And equity for me starts there. But when I work at the World Bank as a senior global director for education, I had the opportunity to work on the SDG, the so-called SDG, Sustainable Development Goals, particularly in SDG 4, which says that we have to ensure for every boy and every girl and every adult quality education. And when they described in SDG 4 what is quality education, it translates into inclusive, equitable, and quality education that ensures good learning results, relevant and equitable results for all. Which means how can we in every school ensure that every kid with the supports needed can receive quality education, ensuring that children with disabilities, for example, are not excluded, that poor kids are not excluded. And for example, a kid that comes from a vulnerable family, that his dad or her dad cannot pay for a tutor if he or she cannot succeed in school, have success in school. How can we support that boy or that girl to ensure that she learns as she deserves and she can potentialize her full talents, her full value?
Mm-hmm. Maybe so it's great that the SDG kind of lines up with seemingly how we've been talking about equity. I think how you've been thinking of it, every student receives what they need to reach their full academic and social potential might be a way of thinking about it as well. And everyone does not need the same thing, right? So there's this aspirational quality toward it, because it is awfully difficult to provide everyone with what they need, but that could be named as the aspiration. That's kind of how I hear you describing equity.
Yes, but if I can give you another example. I was Secretary of Education in the city of Rio de Janeiro, where, as many people know, there are 155 slums. We call it favelas. We call them favelas. Slums that are in areas controlled by the drug dealers or the militias, where conflict is very present. So for those kids to learn and develop their full potential, it's much harder. So when I was secretary, we decided to do the following: to pay more for the teachers that would work in those areas. For the principal that decides to take on this role, we would pay more. So it became a competitive position to teach in those areas. And if we didn't have money, for example, due to fiscal restrictions or something like that, to have science lab in all the schools, those schools had science labs. We didn't have money to have physicians or nurses in every school. Those schools had after-school activities and other things. So this is building equity also.
From a policy perspective, allocating resources in a way.
More resources to those schools. And it resulted in increased learning results. So they increased in 2 years after doing this. In the national exam that is given every 2 years, they increased 33%, much more than the rest of the schools.
Great results. Yeah. So you mentioned a phrase in there that I want to ask you more about, which is a cohesive society. I think because we're going to move toward a discussion about technology, artificial intelligence, algorithms, I think there is a sense that that algorithms actually lead to a less cohesive society, or more polarization sometimes, at least when we think of things like social media. But AI, of course, is, its uses in education is a bit of a different story. But when you talk about a cohesive society, can you tell me a little background on that phrase and why you use that and why that should be what we maybe hold in mind, or what you hold in mind when you're thinking about policy and education?
When I visited many countries and many school systems, and I visited schools in Shanghai, which is one of the best school systems in ensuring learning for all, based on PISA results. I was discussing my findings with somebody from the business sector, a foreigner like I was there. And he said, it's very important to build a cohesive society. And in a sense that was interesting to me, which is a society not where everybody is equal, but everybody has equal opportunities, where the society is not as people don't hate each other so much. And then I said, well, I will steal that expression and use in other contexts because it connects with education, or at least what good education should do, which is to teach not only people to get content or develop some skills for their work, but to be better citizens, to talk to one another, sharing different views, but understanding from where the other is coming from, to be able to have non-aggressive communication. And if you educate all, you will not need to deal with some things that societies that are badly built, where inequality is raving up, or which is to be able to live together, to build a society where violence will not prosper, where populism, especially this kind of revengeful, resented expressions from people that feel lower down or something like that, will not prosper. So I want a cohesive society, not by the means that when I was a teenager I wanted for saving the world, but through good citizenship education, education for work, education to live well among ourselves.
So there's a number of things you said there. One that struck me was the non-aggressive communication piece, because I think nowadays, I think our students are spending a decent amount of time online. And I think, unfortunately, they're encountering a lot of aggressive communication that can seem normal.
Yeah.
But I think I agree with you that it's not conducive to a cohesive society where there's less competition and less feeling of competition or anxiety around competition.
Yes. A book that struck me a lot was the book from Jonathan Haidt, The Anxious Generation. Because, yes, social networks, there is a demand for liberty of expression that turns out as aggression, as a very aggressive communication. And I think if there is something that we don't need, is aggressive communication, because I feel entitled to hurt you for no reason, because I don't see you in front of me when I'm in social network. And you feel entitled to take revenge from...
Because I have freedom of speech.
Freedom of speech. Like and I think this is not freedom of speech. It's not freedom to hurt. It is to say what I think, but also to listen to your perspective. And who knows if it won't enrich my perspective. Not necessarily change my line of thought, but enrich my perspective. So, yes, we are living times when we are too much navigating in internet as if it were the public space where I can offend anyone. And this is not healthy. I'm not talking about internet for children and adolescents, but even for us adults.
Sure.
We are offending each other too much, one another too much.
Well, I think that brings us then maybe to thinking about artificial intelligence and how the recent explosion of artificial intelligence is I think, prompting us to ask questions about what schools should be doing. And you wrote about this after the pandemic and the future of schools, or the school of the future. And some of the things that you mentioned that schools should be focusing on is helping students, equip students with the competencies necessary for life in society, and then the values that can help them ensure a sustainable future. So I'd like to talk about both of those. What do you see as some of the competencies that we should focus on so that we're educating students in a way that's different from as if they were machines?
I would take a step back and say what we shouldn't educate our students for.
Yeah.
We will, in the future, compete with robots, quote unquote.
Mm-hmm.
This is something we have to be aware. Yuval Harari wrote a lot about this, and other writers, other thinkers, philosophers. When they say, well, okay, many jobs will be destroyed, job posts will be destroyed. Mm-hmm. Osborne and Frey predict that 3 billion job posts up to 2030 will be extinct. That's a lot. Even if they are projecting too much job posts being, let's say,
even if
1
it's
billion.
Half.
Yeah, 1.5 billion. It means that many of the professions will all completely disappear, or have so less positions available for the students that are presently in schools, mm-hmm. that they won't be ready for that. ILO, the International Labor Organization, in Brazil we call it OIT, Organização Internacional do Trabalho, for those of you who mm-hmm. speak Portuguese, mm-hmm. Has created a global commission on the future of work. And they invited 26 people from around the globe, one in each area. I was the person in education, to think how we should change the way we do things in different sectors to prepare the future generations for this future that was about to come. That was back in 2018 to 2019. So it was 18 months working on that. And so I studied systems that were already thinking about that, systems of school, and I discovered that the skills and abilities that they were trying to foster in the students was complex problems solving, collaborative solving with creativity. Robots are unable to have original creativity. They don't have imagination, mm-hmm. and they don't collaborate on complex problems, only on operational problems. System thinking and critical thinking. They were concentrated also in 21st century skills, social and emotional skills mostly, educating for values and attitudes, like student agency, which is so important for engaging, especially teenagers. Mm-hmm. Also on developing technological competencies, digital competencies in their students, but not substituting the physical word for digital word, working with the two words. Just to provide you some examples, mm-hmm. we will need to develop in ourselves what makes us more humans and not what makes us more similar to robots.
So I have a lot of sympathy for this, but I find myself wanting to push a little bit. I think, I'm curious how you arrived at this idea of complex problem solving and critical thinking. Is it just because artificial intelligence or robots can't do it? Because we don't necessarily have longitudinal data mm-hmm. to suggest that students are successful long-term. Because in a way, we don't know what their future will hold. I guess maybe what I'm saying is there's a little bit of, there seems to be a leap of faith that if we help them work on complex problems, they'll be able to do it in the future. I think it kind of makes sense, but I wonder do you get pushback as you're thinking about policy that is aligned with this particular approach?
Well, at that time, there wasn't much literature about that. But now there is. There is. Yes. Problem solving is central to what we need for the future. I'm a little bit too assertive, but there is. It is in a sense a bet because we don't know exactly what the future will bring to us. Perhaps AI will be just a tool that we will use and things will continue as usual. I don't put my cards or my bet on that scenario. What we are seeing already is quite challenging. But there is now strong literature suggesting that if we invest in some things that already there was an attempt to go in that direction. If you think about Montessori, for example, Maria Montessori, she said something back in the beginning of the 20th century that we should prepare young people to process their thinking. So when you're working with with mathematics, you should not only solve problems, but learn to explain why you think you arrive to that conclusion. So working on problems also appeared in an approach to making curriculum more flexible, integrating different subject areas, for example, through learning, through project learning, or learning through projects or problems. So addressing problems is very central to all this. But just to finalize my example or my explanation, if you think about journalists in the future, one profession, much less journalists are needed right now because the algorithms are, if you provide them some data, they are able to build a narrative. If you go to ChatGPT, you can do it. So you don't need so much. But journalists that are able to go deep in their analysis, so to look at problems, analyze them deeply, and perhaps even working together, be able to build propositions on that problem, this is still very much needed.
I think that's a great example because a journalist who can reckon with the complexity of a situation and the humanity of a situation and be willing to suspend disbelief, pursue avenues that might lead nowhere, that sort of skill set, a computer, it's difficult to imagine a computer could have that. If it's just doing some research and regurgitating information, that's, at this point, that's something that the machines can do, right?
So if I would summarize everything we said, is the school has the school of the future needs to teach how to think. That demands more time, more skilled teachers that won't give quick responses, but will teach the kids to think.
Which brings up kind of an analogous problem to what we were talking about earlier, which is the assessment piece. You've said that some of this creative thinking and critical thinking, problem solving can be captured in assessments. And I know PISA is trying to move in that direction.
Yes.
But it's much more complicated, isn't it, to capture student learning and growth
Yes.
In the dimension that we're talking about, this, the ability to address a complex problem, apply creativity to it. I have to say that I think I see it happening in our school, and our teachers can see it, but it's hard to like aggregate that into evaluating a school or a district.
It's very hard to evaluate. The OECD education, they were struggling with new assessments or new evaluations, a new evaluation system for a while. In 2022, they finally prepared a different exam in PISA, which was on creative thinking, which is not exactly critical thinking, but it is a first attempt to go deeper in that. Brazil didn't do very well. We are a very creative people that cannot transform this being creative in the arts into creative thinking for the students, which is something different, or ensuring that we can think outside the box without destroying the box.
But it sounds like you think there's an opportunity there, because there is untapped creativity, or there's a lot of creativity. It's just maybe not working in the right space.
In the end, if you think about what is the role, the secular role of education, it is, in a sense, yes, to transmit the knowledge acquired by previous generation into a new generation that is at school. Let's limit education to the school, just for the purpose of this answer. So they need to acquire the knowledge and the competences that the previous generation have developed, but at the same time, prepare them to be disruptive. And that's where creativity appears. But you can only disrupt understanding the previous knowledge. So that's why I said, trying to go outside the box, to think outside the box without destroying the box. You have to understand from what perspective the previous generation were building those knowledge. What were their hypotheses, and prove their hypothesis wrong. That's why scientific thinking is so important, but not scientific in the sense of knowing physics, chemistry, and biology only. Is thinking scientifically, building hypotheses that will be tested, and not reading about it in WhatsApp groups or on social media.
And it almost sounds too like there's an overlap for creativity. It's both a competency, but also maybe a value.
In a sense, yes. But it is also a competence. Yes, it is also a competence.
So then on the values side, what are, values that may help ensure a sustainable future or a cohesive society? Maybe it's both. How do you think about those, and how has that worked in policy?
Values are connected to noticing that you are not alone. You are a member of a diverse society. And being comfortable with your own identity, for teenagers means building your own identity, because an identity is not necessarily a given. And at the same time, understand that others have the right to build their own identities as well. And perceiving that it is enriching to have a society that is diverse. That's why when I was explaining what is cohesive, it's not excludent society. It's exactly the opposite, where I can live with different identities present on my surroundings. Yes, I can choose who I want to be friend with, but at the same time, taking that as an enrichment opportunity. And also to understand from where, for example, I was talking about previous generation, where the different generations were coming from when they arrived to some conclusions that now I know that were perhaps wrong or unacceptable. Let's talk about writers, for example. There is a Brazilian writer, Monteiro Lobato, who was racist. Yes, he was racist. How did he become racist? And could I read his books, understanding what good he brings? He's one of our best writers for children. He was a very good writer. And there are very good ideas there. I'm not racist. I won't accept that side. But I can, as an educator, explain to the children, well, he was born during slavery. So he heard from his parents, from his family, that it was perfectly okay to be racist. And then we can understand without subjugating us to those ideas.
Mm-hmm. Maybe that's a rhythm of true critical thinkers to understand that we're not going to tolerate racism, but we can recognize that human beings are complicated, as is their context, and to really understand his work and his contribution, we have to acknowledge that it's not as simple as rejecting or denying something or accepting it. There's more to it.
And also to understand that being a racist, when the society is racist, there are some structural things that fosters your own racism.
Mm-hmm.
So it's structural.
Mm-hmm.
But society evolves. An understanding, I cannot judge Socrates with my values from nowadays. I can say I don't accept this idea or that idea, but I can benefit from his own contributions.
Mm-hmm. That's great. Claudia, as we move toward closing, I wanted to ask you joined Nordanglia's education advisory board, and you said that one of the reasons you joined the board, we have around 80 schools around the globe, and you said that you had joined the board in part to learn as much as you can from different schools and maybe bring that to the work that you're moving forward. So I wanted to ask, what have you learned so far as being part of the board?
Oh, a lot. It's an education advisory board. Now Nordanglia, if I'm not wrong, has 88 schools.
Okay, 88.
Some of the top of the world, very good schools. And at the same time, schools with different challenges. So seeing different challenges that those schools have inside them and seeing that they struggle to be even better is very interesting. And I like the idea of bringing those ideas to other schools, especially to the schools that need a better approach, the public schools, the schools that where vulnerable kids are attending. There are very good ideas that I discovered, for example, here in Avenues or in Mobile or in schools in Mexico that can be feasible not only in this environment that attend very kids from families that are more affluent, but also some of those ideas are great ideas. Mm-hmm. Let's use them in schools where vulnerable kids need additional support.
Excellent. Well, we're grateful that you can maybe play the role of connector because I'm the head of secondary division. We have around 80 teachers, and I know that one of the best ways to help teachers learn and grow is just to get them to talk to each other because they're facing similar problems. So maybe from your perspective on the board, you can help schools talk to each other who are facing similar problems and serve as a connector for us.
Well, in the meetings that I've been to, I saw schools talking to each other. You know, I believe a lot in collaborative learning. I was previously mentioning problem solving, collaborative problem solving. Teachers can do a lot of collaborative problem solving and learning from one another, much more than learning from universities or learning from academics that will throw their knowledge on them. It's learning from another teacher that is struggling with a similar problem. I've seen this in Islam, a principal of one school mentoring a principal from another school in the same slum, and one supporting the other. That makes a whole lot of difference.
Well, finally, Claudia, the name of the podcast is Education.Elevated. And one of the ideas of the podcast, too, is to elevate teachers and for us to remind ourselves of the substantial impact that they have had on us and also that they have on students within schools. So I wanted to close just by asking if you could tell us about a formative teacher in your life who had an influence on you.
Well, I will mention two teachers. One that I
allow
met
it.
already as an adult, already as somebody devoted to education. His name is very well known in the education sector in Brazil, Celso Antunes. He was a geography teacher. He was my geography teacher in lower secondary or in middle school, as Americans say. And he made us think. That was something that was very formative because he was always developing in the short time of school that we had a school's journey of 4 hours a day at that time. But he created a dynamic that was very much hands-on to learn geography in a very well-built way, but with hands-on researching, debating if people from the Northeast should migrate to the Southeast or not, if it was good for them or not, researching, you know, in middle school, things that were not so typical of the time that we were taught like that. And so Celso Antunes is one of them. And I'm very frustrated because I had an excellent history teacher that I never discovered what happened to her. And every time I find somebody from that time, I'm almost 70, so you can imagine when I studied, I say, what happened to teacher Elsa? Where is she? Probably she's not on Earth anymore. So I hope that I hear more about her sometime. I hope that everybody that is in school right now remembers the name of the school. And after you graduate high school or something, go after your teachers and give them a feedback.
Claudia Costin, thank you so much for joining us today on Education.Elevated. We appreciate your talking about your experiences and education policy and are really glad that you've joined our advisory board, and we'll be in touch in the future.
Thank you very much.
So thank you for listening today to Education Elevated. If you enjoyed this show, please subscribe and we'll talk to you next time.